Part 1: The Long Peace. The galaxy had known peace for 12,000 years. It was a peace so complete, so total, that most species had forgotten what war even meant. The word existed in old texts and ancient records, but it felt like a myth, like something that happened to other people in other times in places that no longer existed. The Galactic Concord ruled everything. 4 great civilizations had come together long ago and decided that conflict was wasteful. They were the oldest, and they were beings made of living crystal and light, and they had existed for millions of years. They moved slowly, thought deeply, and believed that patience could solve any problem. The swarm came next. They were insect-like creatures with hard shells and sharp minds. Billions of them shared thoughts through their queens, moving as one great organism across hundreds of worlds. The monoliths of were perhaps the strangest. They were made of living stone and silicon, thinking thoughts that took centuries to complete. And finally, there was the dreaming chorus, a race of psychics who had merged their minds into one great song that echoed across the stars. Together, these 4 civilizations had created paradise, or so they believed. Then humanity arrived. They came from a small corner of the galaxy that the Conquered had marked as quarantine zone long ago. The early surveys had shown a violent species on the 3rd planet of an unremarkable star. They had watched them for thousands of years, waiting to see if they would destroy themselves like so many others had. They almost did, several times, but somehow, impossibly, they survived. In the year that humans called 4847 CE, the first human ships crossed into conquered space. They were not warships. They were trading vessels, exploration craft, and diplomatic shuttles. The humans came with gifts and questions, and an eagerness to learn that the elder races found almost childlike. The conquered welcomed them carefully. Humanity was young. Their civilization was barely 10,000 years old, a blink of an eye compared to this millions. They were treated as children at a table of adults. Interesting, perhaps. Amusing, certainly, but not important. High Luminary Al of the wrote in her personal records, "The humans are curious creatures. They smile too much. They move too quickly. They seem unable to sit still or think quietly. But they are harmless. They will learn our ways in time, and their rough edges will smooth. They are no threat to the conquered." For 300 years, this seemed to be true. Humans spread slowly through conquered space. They built trading stations in places the elder races considered worthless. They colonized harsh worlds that the found too dry, that the monoliths found too hot, that the dreaming chorus found too loud with geological noise. They adapted. They improvised. They made homes in places that should not have supported life. The elder races noticed 2 things about humanity during this time. First, humans were relentlessly optimistic. They faced problems with a strange energy that they found exhausting to watch. When a human colony failed, they built another. When a trade deal went wrong, they tried a different approach. When they were told something was impossible, they simply asked why, and then tried anyway. This optimism was not based on logic or evidence. It seemed to come from somewhere deeper, some well of confidence that never ran dry. Second, humans were comfortable with chaos in a way that disturbed the elder races. The conquered valued order, stability, predictability. Their systems had worked for 12,000 years precisely because they changed slowly and carefully. But humans thrived in uncertainty. They made decisions quickly, changed their minds freely, and seemed to enjoy situations that had no clear answers. They called this cognitive flexibility. They called it dangerous instability. The monoliths simply could not understand it at all. Ambassador Wei was humanity's voice in the Galactic Assembly during this time. She was a small woman with hair and sharp eyes. She had been a soldier once, long ago, before becoming a diplomat. The elder races did not know this. They saw only a smiling human who asked too many questions and laughed too easily. Wei understood something that the elder races had forgotten. Peace was not natural. It was not the default state of the universe. Peace was a choice, made every day by beings who remembered what the alternative looked like. The conquered had been at peace so long that they had forgotten this truth. They believed their systems were permanent. They believed conflict was behind them forever. Wei knew better. She had studied human history. She knew what happened when civilizations grew too comfortable, too certain of their own safety. She had read about empires that fell because they could not imagine falling. She had seen the patterns repeat again and again across thousands of years of human experience. So when she attended meetings of the Galactic Assembly, she watched carefully. She noted the growing tension in the delegates. She observed the restlessness in their movements, the sharp clicks of their mandibles when they were frustrated. The queens were changing, evolving in ways the conquered had not anticipated. 12,000 years of peace had seemed like a gift to the elder races. But to the whose biology was built for expansion and conquest, it had become a prison. Wei reported her concerns to the Terran Confederacy. She warned that they were growing unstable. She suggested that humanity should prepare, quietly, for the possibility that the long peace might end. The Confederacy listened. They began to build slowly and secretly in the outer reaches of their territory. They studied the elder races, learned their weaknesses, mapped their blind spots. They did not want war, but they understood, in a way the conquered could not, that wanting peace and being prepared for its opposite were not contradictions. They noticed none of this. They were too busy congratulating themselves on another century of stability. The monoliths were deep in contemplation that would not conclude for another 200 years. The dreaming chorus sang their endless song of harmony and did not hear the discord growing beneath it. Only Wei seemed to understand what was coming. She stood on the observation deck of the human embassy station, looking out at the stars, and she felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. "They think peace is a gift," she said to her aide, a young man named Thomas who would one day become an admiral. "They don't understand that it's a loan, and loans always come due." Thomas asked her what humanity would do when that day came. Wei smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who knew hard times were coming and had made peace with that knowledge. "We'll do what we've always done," she said. "We'll survive, we'll adapt, and if we're lucky we'll help them survive too, even if they don't want our help." The stars continued to burn in the darkness, indifferent to the small dramas of civilizations. Somewhere in the depths of a space, the first queen was beginning to remember what her ancestors had known. War was coming, and the galaxy was not ready. But humanity was. Part 2: The Fracturing. The war did not begin with weapons. It began with an idea. Deep in the heart of a space on the spawning world of Prime, the Supreme Queen experienced something her species had not felt in 12,000 years. She remembered. The memories came from deep within her genetic code, passed down through countless generations, sleeping until now. She remembered what it meant to hunt, to conquer, to spread across the stars like a great tide, consuming everything in her path. The conquered called this the awakening. They called it the remembering. Whatever its name, it changed everything. For 12,000 years, the queens had suppressed their nature. They had followed the conquered's laws, limited their expansion, controlled their population. They had done this because they asked them to, because it seemed like the wise choice, because peace had benefits that war did not. But now, looking at the stagnant state of her species, the Supreme Queen asked herself a simple question. Why? Why should they limit themselves? Why should they follow rules made by crystalline beings who had never known hunger? They did not understand what it meant to be a swarm. They did not understand the burning need to grow, to spread, to become more. Their laws were chains, and the Supreme Queen decided it was time to break them. The first attack came without warning. 300 warships emerged from fold space above the dreaming chorus colony of Harmony's End. The colonists had no weapons. They had no defenses. They had never needed them. They did not even have to fire. They simply landed, spread across the surface, and began to consume. The dreaming chorus screamed, not in words but in pure psychic anguish that echoed across 1,000 light-years. Billions of minds, connected in perfect harmony, felt their brothers and sisters die. The song that had lasted for millions of years developed its first wrong note. The Galactic Assembly convened in emergency session. High luminary and of the stood before the gathered delegates. His crystalline form pulsed with colors that indicated deep distress. "This is impossible," he declared. "They have been our partners for 12,000 years. There must be some mistake, some misunderstanding." There was no misunderstanding. Even as in spoke, 12 more of fleets were striking at chorus colonies across the spiral arm. The Supreme Queen had planned well. She had studied the Conquered's weaknesses for decades, waiting for the right moment. Now that moment had come. The called for negotiations, the refused, the proposed sanctions. The ignored them, the threatened to cut the off from Conquered trade networks. The Supreme Queen laughed, a clicking sound that her translators struggled to convey. "You have nothing we need," she told the assembly. "You have nothing we want except your worlds, and we will take those ourselves." The monoliths of began their deliberations. This was their way. They gathered their greatest minds, connected their silicon networks, and began to think. Their thinking was slow but thorough. They would consider every angle, every possibility, every outcome. They would reach a conclusion that was logically perfect. Unfortunately, their deliberations would take approximately 47 years to complete. By then, there might be nothing left to save. Ambassador Wei requested permission to address the assembly. They granted it reluctantly. They did not expect the young species to offer anything useful, but protocol demanded that all Conquered members be heard. Wei walked to the speaking platform. She was old now, over 90 years by human counting, but her eyes were still sharp. She looked at the gathered delegates, the panicking, the silent monoliths, the traumatized fragments of the dreaming chorus, and she felt a great sadness. She had warned them. For decades she had warned them. They had not listened. "We have seen this before," she said simply. "We know how this ends. We are prepared to help, but only if you are willing to accept what help from us actually looks like." Anne's lights flickered with what might have been irritation. "And what does help from humanity look like, Ambassador?" Wei did not answer directly. Instead, she asked a question. "High Luminary, when was the last time they fought a war?" And had to think. The answer, when it came, was troubling. "We have not engaged in armed conflict for approximately 4 million years." And the dreaming chorus? A fragment of the chorus answered, its voice hollow with grief. "Never. We have never known war." The monoliths? No response came. The monoliths were still deliberating whether to acknowledge the question. Wei nodded slowly. "Humanity ended our last major war 312 years ago. Before that, we fought another, and another before that. Our history is written in blood and fire. We nearly destroyed ourselves a dozen times. We have made every mistake a species can make, and we have survived every one of them." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You think this makes us primitive, violent, dangerous, and perhaps you are right. But it also means we remember what you have forgotten. We remember what war costs. We remember what it takes to win. And we remember what happens when you are not ready for the storm." The assembly was silent. Even the eternal glow seemed dimmer. "We can help you," Wei continued. "But our help is not gentle. It is not clean. It will require you to do things you have spent millions of years trying to forget. So I ask you, are you ready to remember what you are? Are you ready to fight?" Anne's response came quickly. Too quickly, Wei thought. "We appreciate humanity's offer, but the Conquered has managed crises before. We will find a diplomatic solution that can be reasoned with." Wei smiled. It was the same smile she had worn decades ago when she first warned the assembly about the coming storm. It was not a happy smile. "Very well," she said. "When you change your mind, you know where to find us." She turned and walked out of the assembly chamber. Behind her, they began discussing new diplomatic initiatives. The dreaming chorus wept. The monoliths continued their eternal deliberation. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, the fleets were already moving toward their next targets. Wei returned to the human embassy station. Her aide Thomas met her at the dock. He was no longer young, had crept into his hair and lines marked his face, but his eyes were the same as they had always been. Sharp, watchful, ready. They refused, he said. It was not a question. Wei nodded. They refused. They think they can talk their way out of this. They think they will see reason. Will they? Wei looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, worlds were burning. Billions were dying. The long peace was ending in screams and fire. No, she said quietly. They will not, but we cannot force the conquered to accept our help. They must ask for it. They must choose it. Otherwise, we become just another conqueror, and humanity has had enough of that. Thomas understood. This was the human way. You offered your hand, but you did not force anyone to take it. You waited. You watched. And when the time came, you were ready. How long do we wait? He asked. Wei closed her eyes. Until they have no other choice. Until they understand what they are facing. Until they are ready to become what they need to become. She opened her eyes and looked at her old friend. Then we teach them how to survive. Part 3, The Reckoning. 18 years. That is how long it took for the galaxy to break. The dreaming chorus fell first. They had developed weapons specifically designed to shatter psychic connections. When they deployed these weapons above the chorus, the effect was instant and terrible. Trillions of minds that had been one for millions of years suddenly became trillions of individuals. The shock was beyond description. Many simply died, their brains unable to process existence without the song. Others went mad, screaming into the void for connections that no longer existed. A few survived, broken and alone, scattered across the stars like leaves in a storm. The monoliths of finally completed their deliberations in year 12 of the war. Their conclusion was perfect in its logic and utterly useless in practice. They declared neutrality. They retreated to their core worlds, sealed their borders, and refused to engage with either side. Their calculations showed that this was the optimal strategy for their survival. They did not seem to understand that survival without action was just a slower form of death. They fought as best they could, but they had forgotten how. Their weapons were 12,000 years out of date. Their tactics were based on conflicts so old that no living being remembered them. They faced the war with courage and determination, and they died in vast numbers. High Luminarian watched his civilization crumble. World after world fell to the swarm. The beautiful crystal cities that his people had built over millions of years were reduced to rubble. The great libraries of knowledge that they had preserved since the dawn of time were burned or scattered. Everything his species had built, everything they had believed in, was being destroyed. And still the humans waited, and did not want to go to them. The thought of asking for help from such a young, violent species filled him with shame. They were supposed to be the teachers, the guides, the wise ones. Humanity was supposed to learn from them, not the other way around. But it was also practical. He could see the numbers. He could read the projections. If something did not change soon, they would join the dreaming chorus in extinction. Pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. He made the journey to Sol System alone. No escorts, no diplomatic team, no ceremony. Just one crystalline being in a small ship, traveling through space that had become hostile and strange. The human station called Humanity's Promise orbited above there. It was not impressive by conquered standards. It was functional, efficient, and plain. The humans had never cared much for beauty in their architecture. They preferred things that worked. Admiral met him at the docking bay. She was a small woman with dark hair and calm eyes. She wore a simple uniform without medals or decorations. She did not smile when she saw him. "High Luminary," she said, "we have been expecting you." And's lights flickered with surprise. "You knew I would come." Nodded. "We knew someone would come eventually. We have been watching the war. We have been counting the dead. We knew that sooner or later the conquered would run out of options." She led him through the station to a simple meeting room. There were no servants, no attendants, no display of power. Just a table and 2 chairs. Sat in one and gestured for him to take the other. "You come to us now," she said, "after 18 years of silence, after dismissing our warnings, after calling us violent primitives in your diplomatic communications." She paused. "Yes, we intercepted those." And's crystal form dimmed with shame. "We were wrong. We did not understand. We thought—" He stopped, unable to find the words. "You thought peace was permanent," finished for him. "You thought the universe had evolved past conflict. You thought that because you had forgotten how to fight, fighting no longer existed." "Yes," and admitted, "we were fools." Studied him for a long moment. Her face showed nothing. Then slowly she leaned forward. "You do not want our assistance, Luminary. Not really. You want our nature. The thing you have spent centuries trying to breed out of your alliance. The capacity for violence, yes, but more than that." She paused. "You want what comes with it." "And what is that?" "The absolute, unshakable belief that we can win." And did not understand. How can you believe such a thing? They control 60% of conquered space. Their fleets outnumber ours 10 to 1. Their industrial capacity is beyond anything we can match. By any logical measure, we have already lost." Smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator that had been waiting a very long time for this moment. "Humanity has never won by logical measures," she said. "We have won by refusing to accept that we have lost. We have won by finding options that our enemies did not consider. We have won by being too stubborn, too creative, and too insane to know when we are beaten." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the blue-green world below. "My ancestors lived on that planet for 200,000 years before they reached the stars. During that time they faced extinction many times, ice ages, volcanic winters, plagues, wars. Every time logic said they should die. Every time they survived anyway." She turned back to him. "Do you know why?" The shook his crystalline head. "Because they never asked if they could win. They only asked what they needed to do to survive, and then they did it. No matter how hard, no matter how terrible, no matter how impossible." Returned to her chair and sat down. "That is what humanity offers you, Luminary. Not weapons, not tactics, not resources. We offer you the ability to look at an impossible situation and say, 'We will find a way.'" And was silent for a long time. His lights shifted through colors that the human translators could not interpret. Finally, he spoke. "And if we accept your help, what do you want in return?" Smile faded. "We want you to survive. We want the galaxy to survive. And we want you to remember when this is over that survival sometimes requires becoming something you do not like. The conquered must change. It must become harder, stronger, more ready for the darkness between the stars. If it does not, another will rise eventually, and we may not be there to help next time." And considered this. It was not what he had expected. He had expected demands, conditions, transfers of power. Instead, the human was asking for something far more difficult. She was asking his people to grow up. "We accept," he said finally. "Whatever help you can offer, we accept." Nodded. She pressed a button on the table and the door opened. A young officer entered, carrying a data tablet. "Admiral," the officer said, "the 7th Fleet reports ready for deployment." And's lights flickered with confusion. "You were already prepared." Stood and straightened her uniform. "We have been prepared for 18 years, she said. "We were just waiting for you to ask." She walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at the ancient being who had come so far to admit his mistakes. Welcome to humanity's war, luminary. It is going to be ugly, it is going to be terrible, but I promise you this, when it is over you will still be alive, and so will your people. She left the room, already giving orders to her staff. Behind her and sat alone, watching the stars through the window. For the first time in 18 years, he felt something strange, something he had forgotten existed. Hope. Part 4: The Human Way. The Terran Confederacy did not send diplomats to negotiate with the A. They did not send warnings. They did not make demands or issue threats. They simply appeared where no one expected them to be. The 7th Expeditionary Fleet emerged from Fold Space in the heart of a territory. Not near a military target, not above a defensive installation, but directly into the sacred spawning grounds of Prime. 42 human vessels, hanging in the darkness above the most important world in the entire swarm. Supreme Queen Al received the report with something like disbelief. Her tactical algorithms, refined over 1 billion years of evolutionary development, had no category for what the humans had just done. The spawning grounds were deep inside a space, protected by hundreds of fleets and thousands of defensive platforms. No sane enemy would attack there. The risk was too great, the defenses too strong, the chance of success too small. But the humans were not trying to attack. They were not firing, they were not advancing, they were simply there, watching, waiting. 42 ships that should have been destroyed the moment they appeared, sitting calmly in the heart of enemy territory. The Queen ordered her fleets to engage. 200 warships converged on the human position, weapons armed and ready. The humans did not move. They did not raise shields. They did not prepare for battle. Instead, they launched something else entirely. Small pods, no bigger than escape shuttles, dropped away from the human ships and fell toward the planet below. The defenses tracked them, calculated their trajectories, and prepared to destroy them. But the pods were fast, faster than anything their size should be able to move. They slipped through the defensive grid, punched through the atmosphere, and landed on the surface. Not on the spawning grounds, not on the military installations. They landed on the agricultural regions, the vast farms that fed the swarm. The Queen did not understand. What could the humans possibly accomplish by attacking farms? Food production could be restored easily. The damage would be minimal, temporary, insignificant. 3 days later, she understood. The pods had contained specialized teams, humans who had trained for this moment for years. They called themselves the gardeners, though what they planted was not life but something far more subtle. In 72 hours, they introduced a tailored biological agent into the food supply. It was not a poison. It did not destroy the crops. It did not kill anything. It simply made the food taste wrong. The biology was ancient and specific. Their digestive systems had evolved to process certain nutrients in certain ways. The taste of their food was not just pleasure. It was a biological signal that told their bodies the food was safe to eat. When that taste changed, their bodies rejected the food automatically. They could not force themselves to eat it, no matter how hungry they became. Within a week, the swarm began to starve. The humans had studied a biology for 300 years, ever since first contact. They had mapped every chemical pathway, every evolutionary adaptation, every weakness. They had never shared this knowledge with the conquered. They had never used it. They had simply waited. The Supreme Queen raged. She sent her fleets to hunt down the human ships, but the 7th Fleet had already disappeared, folding away to another part of a space. More pods were landing on more worlds. More farms were being contaminated. The swarm's food supply was collapsing faster than it could be restored. And then the broadcasts began. Human linguists had spent centuries studying communication patterns. They knew the Queen's private frequencies. They knew the command structures, the hierarchies, the ancient protocols of swarm society. They knew things they had forgotten about themselves. Messages began appearing on military channels. spreading through the swarm faster than the queens could suppress them. Why do you fight for queens who have never known hunger? What will you eat tomorrow? The humans offer food, the humans offer peace, the humans offer choice. The last word was the most dangerous. Choice. The common had not known choice for millions of years. They followed the queens because the queens commanded, because the swarm demanded, because that was how it had always been. The idea that they could choose their own path was strange, frightening, and incredibly powerful. Admiral monitored the situation from her command ship. She did not celebrate the early successes. She knew this was just the beginning. The queens will adapt, she told her staff. They are not stupid. They will find ways to restore their food supply, to counter our broadcasts, to maintain control. We need to keep pressure on them, give them no time to think, no room to maneuver. The human war was not about destroying the enemy. It was about giving the enemy's soldiers a reason to stop fighting. More pods fell, more farms failed, more broadcasts spread through the swarm, and slowly, impossibly, the first cracks began to appear. A hive ship called the Endless Hunger was the first to defect. Its crew had been cut off from resupply for 3 weeks, starving slowly in the darkness between stars. When a human vessel appeared and offered food in exchange for surrender, they did not hesitate. The Endless Hunger was just one ship, but it proved something important. They were not mindless drones. They were individuals capable of making their own decisions when pushed hard enough. The Queen's control was not absolute. It could be broken. Within a year, thousands of ships had defected. Entire hive clusters were surrendering, accepting human food and human protection in exchange for laying down their weapons. The war was not ending, but it was changing. It was becoming something they had never experienced, a war they might lose. High Luminary and observed all of this with growing amazement. He had expected human warfare to be brutal, savage, destructive. He had prepared himself for carnage on a scale the galaxy had never seen. Instead, he watched the humans defeat their enemies by feeding them. "I do not understand," he admitted to Admiral during one of their regular briefings. "You could destroy them. Your weapons are more than capable. Why do you choose this path instead?" Consider the question carefully before answering. "Every we kill today could be an ally tomorrow," she said. "Every world we burn is a world that cannot be rebuilt. Every atrocity we commit is a wound that will take generations to heal. We are not fighting to destroy the luminary. We are fighting to change them." She pulled up a display showing the current state of the war. The swarm was fragmenting, splitting into factions that fought among themselves as much as they fought the humans. The queens started this war because they remembered what it meant to conquer. We are going to end it by teaching them what it means to lose, not through destruction, but through choice. When enough of their people choose peace over hunger, choose cooperation over conflict, the queens will have no one left to command. And lights shifted through colors that indicated deep thought. And if the queens refuse to accept this, if they would rather die than surrender? His expression hardened. "Then they will die," she said simply. "We offer mercy to those who accept it. We offer destruction to those who do not. That is the human way." She turned back to the display, already planning the next phase of the campaign. "We do not fight fair, Luminary. We fight to win. And we win by making sure our enemies have a better option than fighting. Most of them will take it. The ones who do not," she shrugged, "well, they made their choice." Outside the viewport, the stars burned on, indifferent to the small dramas playing out among them. But somewhere in the darkness, the balance was shifting. The hunters were becoming the hunted. And for the first time in 18 years, the galaxy began to believe that the war might actually end. Not in destruction. In change. Part 5: The New Order. The war ended not with a treaty, but with a question. Supreme Queen Al stood in the great chamber of the Galactic Assembly. She was the last of the unified swarm, the final queen who had refused to surrender or defect. Her forces controlled perhaps 5% of what they had once held. Her fleets were scattered, her armies broken, her people starving. She had come to this place not as a conqueror, but as something she had never expected to be, a supplicant. Admiral stood beside her. The human woman had aged during the war. Her hair was white now, her face lined with years and stress, but her eyes were the same as they had always been. Calm, watchful, patient. The chamber was full. They had survived, reduced but not destroyed. The fragments of the dreaming chorus had gathered, learning slowly to exist as individuals rather than as one great song. Even the monoliths of had emerged from their neutrality, their long deliberation finally complete. They had concluded with perfect logic that the universe had changed and they must change with it. Humanity had not asked for a seat at the high table. They did not need to. Everyone knew who had won the war. Everyone knew who had saved them. Why? The queen demanded. Her voice was harsh, clicking with anger and confusion. She looked at with eyes that had seen her empire crumble, her certainties shatter, her people turn against her. You could have destroyed us, she said. Your weapons, your tactics, your creativity. You could have ended the swarm forever. You could have burned our spawning worlds, sterilized our colonies, erased us from existence. We would have done the same to you if our positions were reversed. Why did you show mercy? The chamber fell silent. This was the question that everyone had been asking since the war began to turn. Why had humanity held back? What did they want? What was their price? Considered the question for a long moment. She looked around the chamber at the gathered species, the broken civilizations, the uncertain future. She thought about Wei, who had died 3 years ago without seeing the end she had worked so hard to achieve. She thought about Thomas, now Admiral Thomas, commanding the human forces that still patrolled a space. She thought about all the humans who had fought and died so that this moment could happen. Then she spoke. Because we remember what it is like to be the monsters. The queen's mandibles clicked in confusion. I do not understand. Humanity spent most of its history being exactly what you became, explained. Conquering, consuming, destroying. We built empires on the bones of those we defeated. We committed horrors that still haunt us today. We nearly ended ourselves a dozen times through war, through greed, through simple stupidity. She paused, letting her words settle. And every time we found a way back. Every time we chose to be better than we had been. Not because we were good, but because we learned that the alternative was extinction. Violence without purpose destroys everything, including the one doing the violence. We learned this the hard way, many times. Gestured to the assembled species. You wanted war because you had forgotten what it cost. You remembered the glory of conquest, but not the price of it. You remembered the thrill of victory, but not the ashes that victory leaves behind. She turned back to the queen. We chose confidence because we remembered. Confidence is not believing you cannot lose. It is believing that even if you do lose, you can rebuild. That tomorrow can be better than today. That the enemy you destroy today could be the ally you need tomorrow. The queen's eyes burned with bitter light. You are insane, she said. All of you, you had us beaten, you had us broken, and instead of ending the threat, you offered us food, you offered us peace, you offered us choice. Yes, agreed. That is not how war works. That is exactly how war works, replied. When you fight to destroy, you create enemies who will never stop fighting. When you fight to change, you create allies who choose to stand beside you. The swarm is not gone, Queen. It is transformed. Your people still exist. They still have their culture, their history, their identity. They just no longer have you commanding them to die for your glory. She stepped closer to the queen, close enough to see the hunger and exhaustion in the ancient being's eyes. You can join them, she said quietly. You can accept what has happened and help build what comes next, or you can refuse and be remembered as the last queen who could not adapt. The choice is yours. It has always been yours." The queen was silent for a long time. The chamber waited, barely breathing, to see what she would do. Then slowly, the supreme queen of the swarm lowered her great head. "I accept," she said. "I do not understand, I do not agree, but I accept." Nodded, "That is enough. Understanding will come later. For now, acceptance is all we ask." The assembly erupted into motion. Delegates rushed to draft treaties, to establish new borders, to begin the long process of rebuilding. The war was over. The galaxy had survived. Everything was about to change. 1,000 years later, the history texts would call this moment the Second Awakening. Not the awakening of violence, but the awakening of choice. The moment when the galaxy learned that peace without purpose was just stagnation waiting to shatter. That conflict was not something to be avoided, but something to be understood. That strength and mercy were not opposites but partners. Humanity never claimed leadership of the reformed conquered. They did not need to. Their role was something more fundamental. They became the galaxy's memory of what it meant to struggle, to fail, to get back up anyway. Every species had access to human history now, uncensored and complete. The wars, the atrocities, the mistakes, the recoveries, all of it offered freely as a lesson in survival. On the anniversary of the war's end, beings from across 17 spiral arms gathered to watch a human tradition that had somehow become universal. Fireworks, explosions designed purely for beauty, destruction repurposed for joy, light and color filling the darkness, celebrating the simple fact of existence. The found it poetic, the found it unsettling. The monoliths calculated the energy expenditure and found it statistically irrational. The remnants of the dreaming chorus listened to the sounds and found, to their surprise, that it created a kind of music. But the humans just watched the lights and smiled. They had always been good at turning chaos into celebration. They had always known that the darkness was not something to fear but something to fill with light. They had always believed, against all logic and evidence, that tomorrow would be better than today. And somehow, impossibly, they were usually right. Admiral did not live to see the 1,000-year anniversary. She had died peacefully, decades after the war, surrounded by family and friends. Her last words, according to those who were there, were simple. "Tell them to keep watching the stars. Tell them to keep hopping. Tell them that the darkness is never permanent. The light always comes back. The light always comes back." It became humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not weapons, not tactics, not power. Just a simple truth, learned through millions of years of struggling against the darkness. The light always comes back. You just have to believe it will.